Before starting the story, let us know where you're watching from and what time you're watching. Buried but not dead. Chapter 1. Awakening in Darkness. The first thing Michael Dawson noticed was the suffocating darkness. His breath came in short, ragged gasps as he tried to move, but his arms struck against the solid surface wood. He reached out, his fingers scraping against the coarse material, and panic surged through his body. He was trapped. Buried. A scream built in his throat, but it came out in a muffled cry, the air thick with the scent of earth and decay. He slammed his fists against the wooden barrier above him. Help. Somebody, help me. His voice was swallowed by the silence. The last thing he remembered was leaving the bar after a few drinks. Then, nothing. How had he ended up in a coffin? His mind raced. Was this a prank? Some cruel joke? But no one would go this far. And if they had, someone should have already dug him up by now, laughing. But there was nothing. Just the weight of the soil above him and the deafening beat of his own heart. Chapter 2. The Breath of the Damned. Michael tried to steady his breathing. If he panicked, he'd burn through the oxygen too fast. But how much air did he have left? Hours? Minutes? He patted his pockets. His phone. His fingers fumbled against his jeans. But as he reached for it, his stomach dropped. The screen was shattered. No signal. No way out. Then, from the silence, something moved. A whisper. A voice? Michael's body stiffened. It was faint, barely audible, but he swore he heard it, a guttural, breathy murmur just beyond the wooden walls of his prison. You are not alone. His blood ran cold. His rational mind screamed that this was just his imagination, a trick of fear and exhaustion. But then, the scratching began. Chapter 3. The scratching beneath. It was subtle at first, a light scraping sound. Then it became more frantic, more deliberate, as though something or someone was clawing at the wood from the outside. Michael thrashed, his body writhing against the narrow confines of the coffin. Who's there? He gasped. Get me out. Silence. Then, the whisper again, closer this time. Not dead yet. Michael's stomach twisted. This wasn't a rescue. This was something else. Something waiting, watching. Chapter 4. The Hands of the Past. His mind snapped back to a childhood memory, his grandfather's warnings about the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. People get buried there, but they don't stay dead, his grandfather had muttered one night, rocking in his chair, pipe smoke curling around his face. They come back, scratching, whispering, waiting. Michael had laughed back then. Now, in the silence of his grave, he wasn't laughing. A dull thud echoed above him. The earth shifted. Something was moving outside his coffin. He held his breath. Fingertips. Dragging. Sinking into the soil. Then, with a sickening groan, the wood above him splintered. Chapter 5. The Unseen. Dirt rained onto his face, choking him as he coughed and gasped. He wiped his eyes frantically, blinking against the falling soil. The coffin creaked as something heavy pressed down on it. A shape loomed above him, barely visible in the dim light of the moon breaking through the broken coffin lid. It wasn't human. Its arms were too long, its fingers too sharp. A grin stretched across its hollow face, teeth like jagged shards of bone. Michael tried to scream, but a hand shot out, covering his mouth with a clammy grip. The creature's breath was putrid, its voice a whisper of rotting air. Buried but not dead. Chapter 6. The Escape That Never Was. Michael's survival instinct kicked in. He thrashed, his foot connecting with the creature's chest. It recoiled, hissing, and he scrambled through the loose soil, pulling himself from the broken coffin. He was in a graveyard. Old, forgotten. The tombstones were cracked, covered in vines, their inscriptions worn away by time, but that wasn't what made him stop. It was the open graves. Dozens of them. Some still filled with wooden coffins, some empty. The earth disturbed, as though something had crawled out. Then he heard it. The whispers. Not one, but many. All around him. He turned, heart hammering, and saw them. Shadows moving between the tombstones, their skeletal fingers dragging along the cold stone. Empty eyes locked onto him. Michael ran. Chapter 7. The Endless Nightmare. Branches lashed against his face as he tore through the woods. Breath ragged, lungs burning. The whispers followed. the scratching, the dragging. He stumbled onto a road, relief flooding through him as he saw headlights approaching. He waved frantically, screaming for help. The car screeched to a halt. A man stepped out. What the hell? Michael collapsed. Help me. They're coming. The man's expression turned to confusion. Who's coming? Michael turned. The graveyard was gone. The whispers had stopped. There was nothing behind him but darkness and trees. The man frowned. You need a doctor. Michael shook his head violently. No, I was buried alive. There were things, I swear. The man hesitated. Then, quietly, he said, Michael, you've been missing for 3 years. Michael's blood froze. That's impossible. I was just buried. I was just there. The man's face paled. Your grave is still there. We buried you 3 years ago. Michael's breath caught in his throat. He looked down at his hands, dirt-stained, nails cracked from clawing through wood and earth. Then he saw his reflection in the car window. His skin was sunken, hollow, his eyes dark, lifeless. No, he whispered. The whispers returned, curling around him like smoke. The man stepped back, his face twisting in horror. And then, from the darkness, the voice whispered in his ear once more. Buried, but not dead. Michael opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came. The world around him faded. The road, the man, the car. And then, once more, the suffocating embrace of the earth swallowed him whole.